Morning, psychology. Welcome to Year 13 Research Methods. We are today looking at case studies, thematic analysis and content analysis. So this is in the Year 13 section of the book, which I've uploaded the textbook pages for you. If you haven't already bought the Pink Haired Girl book, I would advocate that because there's a lot in there that for your summer work that you might want to refer to. I will upload the pages. I might upload the pages, I'll see, but if not, it will be really useful for you to have. So where we are with research methods, we've looked at choosing a test, we've looked at all the different tests, we're now on case studies and content analysis. We have reliability, validity, features of science, and reporting, looking at a psychological report. Then pretty much research methods is finished. Over summer, what I want you to do is look at a bit of work on issues and debates, which I'll explain a little bit later, but also keeping research methods really fresh. So 30% of your A-level is research methods. It's been announced that no changes are happening to the exams, although teachers have put forward their concerns. Had to complete a questionnaire, which we said, I think certain modules should be reduced or we should have only 2 papers, but let's face it, they're not going to listen. So we are back to, this is what it's going to be like: 3 papers, 2 hours a paper, 11 modules. So over summer is where you need to be freshening up and making sure that you are on top of things before we get into Year 13. So a quick recap of what we've looked at so far. So you've got 6 questions there. Pearson's, which approaches are deterministic, so they're very specific and say that one thing causes something. Support do we have for locus of control? So remember, we've got internal and external. What were some AO3 points for that? Same for multi-store model. What can you bring in to say, actually, for multi-store model, what is a positive, what is a negative? What studies could we use? Clinical evidence, maybe. Schaefer stages of attachment, there are 4 of them. What are they? And then what AO3 have we got for biological explanations for OCD? You know, is it a really good way of looking at describing OCD, or have we got some pitfalls with that? So you can pause that now, have a think. Treat myself to a nice cup of coffee. And then have a look at the answers and think, actually, this is what I need to go over. So for Pearson's then, it's one of our correlational tests along with Spearman's. It's interval data. It's one of the best tests we can use because it uses interval data. It's parametric. Normality of distributed and homogeneity of variance. What do they mean? So basically, from the textbook, homogeneity of variance is basically the data that they used was normal. There was no outliers. There were no issues. It was all quite a normal data set. And pretty much that's what you want to put for Pearson's. It's a test of correlation. It uses interval data, and it's we assume that we have homogeneity of variance. Approach to deterministic. So psychodynamic is deterministic because it's psychic determinism. Don't worry too much because we're going to do that in issues and debates. Biological is very deterministic along with social learning. For locus of control, we've got a bit of research saying that internals are less likely to fully obey in a Milgram type experiment. AO3 for multi-store model, we've got supporting evidence. We can use anything from coding capacity and duration. Those, you know, Barrick and Peterson, you can bring those in. Along with the fact we've got KF, so we've got more types of short-term memory. But it uses a lot of artificial materials, which makes it pretty weak. Schaefer stages, a social, indiscriminate, specific, and multiple. And then for our biological explanations of OCD, OCD is polygenic, about 230 genes associated with it. We've got environmental risk factors when we look at twin studies. So how can you be sure that one's causing the other? And yeah, lovely. So today then, I will case studies, content analysis, and coding. So you're going to have a go at doing a little bit of analysis yourself. And they love content analysis. They love these types of questions because students forget it. Case studies, nice and simple. We have one person who we're looking at. When they're asked to produce a coding system or to do some thematic analysis, that's where the pitfalls lie. So your homework is to do a bit of thematic analysis, and we're going to practice doing a little bit of coding now. So if we start with, obviously, there are some really interesting case studies that we look at in psychology. We've got Clive Wearing, which we looked at in memory, and we've got Jeannie when we looked at attachment. So 2 videos there just to refresh yourself and have a go at answering these questions. These are in your work booklet, which I have uploaded an electronic version of your work booklet. So if you go onto the VLE and you go on to Psychology Year 12, there is a folder called Closure Work. In there is all the PowerPoints. It's everything that I've set you over the past 15 weeks. So that over summer, if you're on a recovery plan, or if you are just thinking I need to refresh up on this, all of the resources are there. Obviously, they're on Show My Homework as well, but the VLE is all there and accessible. So have a watch of these 2 and refresh yourself. What's the aim? What were they trying to find out in this case study? What research methods did they use to gather information? Was it structured interviews? Was it observation? And would the information they gathered have been easy to get elsewhere, and why? Okay, so just to refresh yourself on some case studies. Oh, okay. So a case study is a research method. It uses a lot of other methods. So if you're looking at someone like Clive Wearing, he had interviews, not that he really remembered them, but they used interviews with him and his wife, who divorced him, cruel. Secondary data, so maybe it's used from other sources, other statistics, other studies. It could be through case history, so going to doctors, going to psychologists and getting those reports and gathering evidence that way, or through experiments. So if we think of somebody like HM in memory, there were loads of experiments that were carried out on HM to test his short-term memory, to see if he was better at one task than another. So the case study is a method, but it uses a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods. Pros and cons, which one is which? Hopefully these are nice and straightforward. So they are incredibly time consuming. So if you think of somebody like Clive Wearing, it's going to take a lot of time to get the data that you need and that's interesting. There's going to be some researcher bias. So if they are really interested in that area, which of course they are, maybe they're going to want to manipulate some of the data to fit what they want. They've put a lot of time and a lot of effort, so they're going to want to find those results. This is a big one, limited generalizability. Because it is one case, it's one person, it makes it really difficult to replicate. It makes it really difficult to replicate. It makes it really hard to generalize it to other areas of the population. But what it does do is it gives us so much detail than a study would with 50, 60 people. It gives us a real insight into something really specific and niche, usually in things like memory or mental illness. It gives us the time, it gives us the ability to research things that would be completely impractical to do and unethical in other situations. So things like memory, we can't carry that out in other ways. It has to be through case studies to give us this in-depth, really rich data. Because it uses a lot of qualitative data, we get a lot of rich insight. Okay, so it's a mix of pros and cons. That could be a typical question you could be asked: describe or evaluate the use of case studies in psychology, and it will just be whacking them in and giving them a description. Task 1 for you then. So in textbook, but also in the workbook, if you're referring back to that, we come across a familiar face who employs this method. So have a go at answering the questions based on Freud's use of methods. Then that's in the workbook. This is in the textbook. I'm not going to try and say that, But have a go at those 3 questions. So the main features of a case study, bit of AO2 here, referring it to the scenario. Discuss the strengths and limitations again, bringing in patient X, and then what ethical issues have we got associated. So a bit of practice of AO2. My worry is we're neglecting AO2 in these 13, 14 weeks. I'm trying to get you to do lots of essays and plans, but we aren't really focusing on AO2. And that is where I think some of the questions are quite tricky. So do these, practice it. Pause this now. And then we've got the answers here. So the individual features are of a case study. Case studies look at the individual in details. In the case of patient X, they're looking into the past, where his fear is developed through interviews, medical records, as well as diary entries. Could be looked at over a period of time, see if any changes in this behaviour. So a longitudinal case study isn't rare, they're quite common. We've obviously got some strengths and weaknesses that we've looked at already. In-depth data. Longitudinal research could be undertaken to give not just the snapshot, but give us the longevity of his fear. Acknowledges the importance of his experience because it gives that rich data, so it allows us to get more of an insight. But it's not generalizable. He's recalling memories which can be distorted, which means that we're using retrospective memory, which is always going to be tricky to use because people's memory change. And then cause and effect cannot be inferred through fear and childhood experience. We've got loads of ethical issues like confidentiality. You've got to make sure that you use pseudonym names like HM, KF. It's important to retain that anonymity because of the mental health of the patient. Perfect. Right. So that's case studies pretty much in a nutshell. They're quite straightforward. They are not generalizable, but they're really interesting. The next part of this is content analysis. And like I said, they love content analysis in the exam. So it's a technique where you are summarizing any form of content. So content could be from the media, it could be adverts, something from a film, an interview, and you're having to summarize what they have discussed and code it. So you're coding what they've talked about. So it could be done through on unstructured observations or answers to interview questions. Like I said, magazines, adverts, and you're going to have a go at advert one in a minute. So what happens is that they listen to, let's say it's an interview, they listen to the interview once, then they come up and count how many different categories occur. So if we've got somebody talking about a breakup, we would code things where they've mentioned feeling lonely, or so loneliness could be a code, or bringing up the person that's involved, that could be a code. So it's converting qualitative data, so rich data, into things that we can measure and we can replicate potentially. They take ages. Content analysis is so long. Part of my dissertation was to do a content analysis of interviews with children in primary school. Oh my Christ, they take so long because you have to think of the categories, go over and watch it time and time to make sure those categories are valid. Ridiculous. So it can be done on any type of data, like we've said, to be TV programs. Quite an interesting thing to do actually or adverts is a great one. How many times is there a female present? How many times is there a male? How many times have they mentioned a certain word? Magazines, books, interviews, case studies, unstructured observations. So how is it done? So depending on what the research question is, you've got to decide what you are going to analyse and how you'll collect it. Then you've got to think about what are the codes going to be, develop your coding categories, pilot it, so put it out there. So let's say it's an interview on your experiences in sixth form. We would come up with a list of categories beforehand, get a group of people who are similar, do that pilot study, see if any changes need to be taken out, tally how many times that coding system, that code has cropped up, check the reliability of the content analysis, so get somebody else to do an observation, inter-observer reliability to make sure that's the same. If it's 0.8, that's good. I want you to have a go. So Uploads on Show My Homework is a grid that has a coding system already done for you. Have a look at this. I haven't checked if it still works. I think it still works. Double check. As you watch it, count how many times those coding systems appear. So in a way, this is where students get confused. It's like using behavioural categories in observations, so kicking, screaming in a primary school. But this is applied to text or recordings. So instead of it being observational, it's based on interviews, it's based on written articles that are present. So it's more of a written form. Okay, so pause this now, go on that and have a go. Just to get yourself used to it. That is a question that I haven't seen crop up, but could be likely, is they say, okay, this is a extract from an interview. Create a coding system that depicts areas of this extract. That's a question that could come up. So, content analysis is the coding system you create. Thematic analysis is a way of summarizing the qualitative data. So, unlike content analysis, the information is not converted to something we can measure, quantitative data. It remains qualitative, and it's looking for themes that are in those qualitative texts or interviews. It's fascinating, actually, thematic analysis, picking out common things that, it's very Englishy, picking up common themes that take place, using quotations, again, takes forever. So how it works is they will, let's say there's an interview, they will type up everything that in words, or the interviewer has said in a transcript. They'll read that repeatedly over and over again, paragraph by paragraph. And any trends that they find, they'll give it like a little shorthand code. So like L for love or A for anger. So annotate it with the codes. Review the coding and see if there are any themes emerging. So what can we pull out from this extract thematically? So it's any idea that's recurrent is basically a theme. So if we've got a number of themes emerging, they may then bring the person back who they did the interview with and create a new set of data to test the validity of their themes. So if their theme is love, they'll create something that reflects that to see if actually what they found is love. So an example of a experience at school. I'm always getting pushed and shoved with the other boys at school. They call me the weed and butt face. Once they threaten to set me on fire. Can't go anywhere without worrying what will happen if they are there. So the code here, we've got physical aggression, code being put down, intimidation. So the category, we would then put that into bullying and the theme oppression. So with content analysis, there's strengths and weaknesses to it. Strengths and weaknesses, and I've kind of gone through them a little bit already. So a strength of content analysis, it's reliable. To analyse qualitative data is difficult in itself. And having those coding units, they are open to interpretation. But if you have more than one researcher come in, it makes it better, basically. So it is a reliable way of doing it because you can test it through inter-rater reliability. Easy, not too time consuming. Well, I think it's quite time consuming, but they argue it's not. And it allows for statistical analysis to be conducted if required, as is usually quantitative data as a result of the procedure. So once you've got the quantitative data, you can then go out and look at something. Weaknesses, though, causality cannot be established as it merely describes the data. So it's just saying, right, well, in these adverts, we've got more women doing the housework. Okay, what does that mean? As it only describes them, we can't really get any deeper meaning or any patterns that we can apply to wider society. So for you, I want to have a go at thematic analysis. This one here, the extension. So explain how the investigation illustrates some of the, oh no, sorry, not thematic analysis. No, a bit more content analysis. Explain how this investigation illustrates some of the strengths and limitations of content. So again, AO2, how does this study by Matthews depict some of the problems and some of the strengths of using content analysis? So pause this. And then we're here. So content analysis is useful. It can get around many of the ethical issues. The materials of the graffiti on toilet walls already exists in public domain, so you haven't got to obtain anyone's permission to do that. Graffiti is a really interesting one, actually. As a psychologist is categorizing the type of graffiti, the data will be quantitative, which means we can analyze it statistically, maybe running a test. People tend to be studied indirectly as part of a content analysis, so the communication they produce is usually analysed outside the context within which it occurred. There's a danger that the researcher may attribute their own opinions, their own bias and motivations to what the graffiti artist wanted to get across. And I think that's, in English, you get marks for that. If you are, I think this means this. But when they're all talking about, something scientific in psychology, that's not great that you can assume what somebody, their motivations were. Right, and that is pretty much that. So your homework is on thematic analysis, a practice having a go at drawing out common themes. I've uploaded the textbook pages there as well, so you can go back and add to your notes, and so you've got something extra to look at. But hopefully that makes sense. And then we'll move on to looking at reliability and validity next time.